Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. You know, one of the axioms you hear in a presidential election year is that nothing will get done in Congress of any note. Some would say not a lot's been done in Congress of any note prior to that. But so what's new? Can't really say if that's totally true, but the point is they'll say, well, this year everybody's running for election. No one's going to promise anything. No one's going to do anything because it would cause maybe a disruption of their election campaign. How do we feel about that? Well, nothing better than to ask a guy who has to deal in that kind of atmosphere, Congressman Scott Perry from the 4th Congressional, who joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Scott. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
I am doing well. Great to have you in. So, you've heard that axiom from time to time. Nothing's going to get done in a year where there's an election. Right or wrong?
Wrong. You're just not going to hear about it. Things are going to get done, but you're just not going to hear about it.
Talk about the agenda this year that's on the table for Congress. And I kind of wrote down here, the president's in his last year. We do know that for sure, or at least we're pretty sure he is. But the president's in his last year. And obviously, he has said he's energized, he's ready to move forward and so forth. He's got his pen, he's got his phone, he's got his, all that stuff.
Right.
Executive orders. What about Congress? What's the thought here? You guys just had a big retreat the other week, I guess, over in Baltimore, and you laid out the year. What are we looking at here?
So, the president's still going to be the president for the next year. So the things that we want to do, we're fairly certain. I mean, you don't want to predetermine the destiny here, but we're pretty certain he's going to be opposed to. So what I think through the speaker, at least this is what he's saying, and I tend to agree with it to a certain extent, we want to set the table for the future. So what that means is that we want to pick issues that are important to us so that we can show the American people this is what we would work on if we had a president that we could work with. So that's number one, and then prove that we could get them passed so that you can say, look, if we had a president that would work with us, these are the issues that we would take up, and these are the things that we can pass. So that this is what you'll get if you elect a president that will work with the Congress. And those items, Gary, according to Paul Ryan, we would like to do tax reform. We would like to get to regular order, which is the appropriations process, where we pass all the appropriations bills and determine the amount of spending and the priorities for that spending, all 12 bills through the House, through the Senate, on the president's desk, which hasn't happened in years and years now. Certainly all of the president's term at this point, that hasn't happened. And then some other things like working on poverty, trying to, we spent trillions and trillions of dollars on poverty, and there are more people in poverty than ever. So we would like to take a different approach to that, and tax reform. We are forcing businesses to offshore. We just had, we have a local business, I'm sure you're well aware, that's looking to merge and move to Ireland, move their headquarters to Ireland. At the end of the day, that money stays abroad and those jobs go abroad. So we would like to change that as well. But we don't think we can get it with this president. But what we can do is work on the policy and then have it ready to go with the new president. And finally, health care. If we're going to repeal the Affordable Care Act, we have to have a viable alternative that we can all vote for and vote on and get enough votes to pass.
There are people who say when you sent the health care up to the president, got vetoed the other week. I mean, everybody knew that was kind of going to happen. What was the purpose behind that? Simply to take it to that point where the president had to say, okay, this is what I'm doing to my historic piece of legislation. I'm going to make sure I preserve it. Yet many people are saying, well, health care has got some real problems. We've been documenting a lot of those here. Again, are you saying this is what we are in favor of right now and just basically being on record that way? Is that kind of where this is all going? What's the thought process there?
Yeah, it is. It is being on record and showing that we have the votes. In the past for years now, Gary, you guys, everybody has watched one body or the other has repealed a portion of it or has repealed it, but not both bodies, and sent to the president's desk for a veto. This proves part of it is just saying we are on record and we have the will of the Congress through the American people to pass a repeal bill to get it to the president's desk. And if we have a president that will sign it, it will repeal this bill.
When you look at Obamacare, just for a moment, Congressman, and what is good about it and what is bad? I'm trying to be fair in how I've looked at it and looking at all sides. And one of the things that has been interesting to me is that you hear many times Democrats say, well, we've got 19 million people now who are covered who weren't covered before. And I say, well, that's good. We like that. Right. You've got pre-existing conditions kind of taken care of there yet. And yet I also read stories about where people can play that a little bit and get in, use it, and then get out again.
Right.
So I'm seeing that kind of thing. I've also seen stories where they say young people are not coming in anywhere near the rate they thought they would, and so you don't have the funding mechanism to really take care of it the way you should. I've also saw where they've lowered costs, they say, and yet at the same time we have $4,000 and $5,000 deductible for people who can't afford that. So basically they're not really having any kind of health care before the end of that $4,000 or $5,000 unless they have something catastrophic. So it's a mixed bag for me. Give me a little bit of clarity on that if you can.
I think, and I think a lot of people do, so I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me personally, that people believe that health care is available to everybody if you play by some rules, where in the past some people would say, well, there's no access for me to health care, which I would argue there always was. It was inefficient, but there always was access to health care in the United States. But now you can't really use that excuse at all. Not only do you have access to health care, but you have access to coverage mandated by law. So, there's access. I don't like the mandate by law, but there is access. The other thing is the pre-existing condition thing, which I think, look, it's a heartbreaker. This is the one of the most wealthy countries on the planet. We should be able to provide access to people. We don't get to choose our health in too many cases, and so insurance companies too often drove the equation there. And if you had a problem, you just couldn't get coverage. It wasn't really insurance. I understand that, but there's got to be a way to deal with people that have these horrific maladies or what have you, or even small maladies, and they can't get health care coverage that is affordable. To me, those are the two upsides. The downsides are the access to care or the lack of access to care, the consolidation of providers at the hospitals as opposed to your local practitioner. We're seeing that just exponentially. Everybody, nobody can afford to stay in private practice on their own down at Main Street. They've got to leave, whether it's due to the regulatory requirements or the cost, and they've got to go join a hospital, which means if you want to go to the doctor now, essentially more and more often you're going to the hospital. You're not going to your local doctor, which means you have lost your local doctor and you've lost that long-term relationship. And, of course, you've already discussed the cost. I know that we are paying less. When we say we, the government is paying less for health care. We just said we're not going to pay this much for this procedure, doctor. That inherently has driven down some of the costs, but that, of course, has other consequences. Doctors no longer want to provide certain services. Pharmacies don't want to provide certain things because they know they can't recover their costs. That creates access to care problems. So while you say you've driven down the cost, you've also driven out access to care. And finally, that driving down of cost hasn't really been realized by most of the people that are paying for health care, and that's the people that are paying the premiums. Their costs have gone way up, and their deductible. I hear it every single week. Yep. People come in with their bills, and they say, I got less health care and 3 times the cost. And I can tell you that because this is last week. Every single day I had a health care problem appointment in the office while we were here in town. So it just doesn't end. And those are real problems for people that are struggling to make ends meet.
And what's really interesting about that is, again, you see a kind of, and I guess this is the way insurance is set up, the way healthcare is set up, but you see a kind of redistribution from those who have to those who have not. And those who have not are getting subsidies, and those who have are not. And in the long run, that's hurting them. I also think when it comes to healthcare, I mean, you look at the costs right now. Yeah, they're being driven down. But when you look at Medicare is paying less to doctors right now than they've ever paid before. And so thus, I think part of the cost that you were talking about, doctors are leaving because they're not being reimbursed for a lot of the things that are mandated there during Medicare, and yet they're not going to be paying for those things, and doctors aren't staying up with the costs.
So what good is cheap health care if you can't get it because there's no doctor that will take you? That's kind of, that's the equation, and that's I don't know if it's the intended consequence or unintended, but either way, it's the consequence. And there's another bigger issue that we haven't discussed at all.
Well, but part of that, too, is also saying, but Medicare is also covering a lot of people now, and that's kind of in those numbers of people who are now insured who weren't insured before, because we do have an aging population as well. So, right. I mean, that's a little bit of the sleight of hand kind of stuff that you don't hear much about, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And quite honestly, you mentioned the 19 million in the numbers in the beginning, and I'm skeptical of that. And I wonder how many of those people had lost their insurance and lost their coverage due to the mandates, and then regained it. Is that a new? If that's somebody, they're saying that's somebody that's now covered, but in most cases, in a lot of cases, those people were covered before and were happy with what they had and didn't want to be uncovered to be recovered of something less in coverage and more expensive.
It's interesting. I want to switch up with you a little bit here.
Yeah.
And I saw Nancy Pelosi said something yesterday, who, of course, is the majority leader of the House, Congressman Pelosi. And she said, we're not running on a platform of raising taxes. We do want a fairer tax system. I'm always amazed at how many different ways people can say they want to raise taxes without saying they want to raise taxes.
Right.
And a fair tax system means, if you read what most Democrats have talked about, is the rich get hit more. Obviously, when the rich get hit more, the middle class is going to get hit more. We're already seeing the middle class suffering. And all of this to make sure that we siphon, again, money off elsewhere. Your thoughts about a fairer tax system?
I think there does need to be a fair tax system, and there's a lot of people at the top that are paying. When I say at the top, they're not the Exxon Mobils and the GEs, all right? There are people right in your community that work very hard, invested a lot, and have paid dearly over years to get what they have, and they're paying dearly in taxes more than many other people are. And then you have these people corporations that can afford legions of accountants and lawyers that find ways to pay absolutely nothing, and so they're not paying their fair share. And then you got some folks at the bottom who have absolutely no stake in their country that don't pay anything but get, a lot of services and a lot of things paid for. And meanwhile, we're pushing corporations out of the country by having the highest tax rate in the free world. And we complain that, these businesses take their money elsewhere and take the jobs elsewhere. I don't know why they wouldn't when we're essentially forcing, they have stockholders to account to. And by the way, those same stockholders are us, who oftentimes have our money in our 401ks and our pension plans invested in these companies, and we demand good returns. And so if we want a socialist economy, all that stuff is going to change, and it's not going to be easy to do. And it's going to bring all of us down to a lower level, in my mind, at the end of the day. And those are the discussions we're not really having about the impact of these socialist and liberal policies.
We're talking with Congressman Scott Perry this morning from the 4th Congressional. Congressman, one of the things in this campaign, I don't want to talk about a specific campaign because I know you're not allowed to do that, but I want to talk about it in general. One of the things that we're seeing in this campaign generally, and you see Sanders and Trump particularly, talking about this battle against the establishment being Washington, the establishment being Congress, the establishment being the power class that people talk about. And one of the two words we hear a lot, crony capitalism, that we have this unholy alliance between many businesses and interests and many congressmen and senators, particularly up at the higher level. You're a guy that's exposed to this kind of stuff. I suppose there probably are people who come to you with some unholy kinds of deals occasionally, and your job is to turn them away. But we apparently think that there are a lot of congressmen and senators and so forth, because of the legislation we've seen, who don't turn them away. Your comments about that, your thoughts about that, and how that works with Congress.
Well, it is driving the discussion too much, and it has become the big businesses, the very big businesses and big interests, whether they're business or individuals, have figured out that they can influence policy to cut out the competition and make it, enable themselves to make more money. And so that's what they've done. And it's even gone to the next step where they're almost now bothering less with Congress and more with the regulatory agencies, because they know that that's what's really going to affect them. And so, and that is just the horrific transition of what's happened in our society, and based on the system that we have. And you need people of integrity and so on and so forth. I would say, Gary, I'm working on some legislation right now. I'm not going to name what it is, but it's coming up shortly, and it's part of a broader package. And I had a big company weigh in on the amendment, so to speak, and with my staff. And my staff told me, well, if you change it too much, they're not going to support it. And if they don't support it, then it's probably going to lose. And I just told them, I said, look, they can either get on board with what I have, I'll be happy to listen to their comments, or they can have absolutely nothing, which is what they have now. I'm not writing it for them. If it's good for them, that's great. But what I'm writing it for is what's good for America. That's my intent. And if it's good for America, it should be good for them. I don't know if everybody says that, quite honestly, because now, I'm sure they're going to be a little reluctant. Maybe they won't come to a fundraiser or something like that. And I'm happy talking about that stuff, Gary, because as I'm described by one of my colleagues as the least encumbered member of Congress, and he looks at my fundraising ability. I just don't play the game. I want to do the right thing, and if you support it, that's great. If you don't think it's the right thing and you don't support it, that's great too. But I think too often the tail wags the dog. Where what do you want? You've got the money. Okay, we'll do that. And now I can have the money. I didn't want to go to Washington to do anything like that. So that's kind of where I see it. You're right. I do see it. It's unfortunate, but those constituents that elect that person have to atone for that, I guess, or accept that. I do what what I can stand to do, and look in the mirror and look at my constituents and the voters and say this is where I am. And when that ends, then I end.
And you hear a lot of people say they'd like to unentangle us from those things. I want to ask you how hard that would be when we come back here on the Gary Sutton Show. Congressman Scott Perry from the 4th Congressional. He's right here on WSBA. Back with more right after this. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Back with Congressman Scott Perry of the 4th Congressional. Congressman, I have to ask you a story about a story I read yesterday. Actually, it was 2 days ago. The State Department, this was on Friday, said they won't release 18 emails between Hillary Clinton and President Obama that were on her private server, but says they were not classified. Two things came out on that day. He said, and I'm not relating these to the election at all. I'm relating these to her job. Number one, the president said last year about March 6th that he didn't know anything about this. He had never sent her any email. Well, it turns out he sent her 18 of them. So the president knew a little bit more than that, although I'm sure with all the communications the president sends out and so forth, maybe he's not aware. But it would seem to me that you'd be aware of what you'd send to your Secretary of State. Just a thought.
Right.
Second thing is, the State Department says, this is how far we go in trying to stretch the truth. They said they won't be releasing 18 emails exchanged between President Obama and Hillary Clinton because they have been seen to be top secret in some way, shape, or form, some level of being top secret.
Too highly classified.
Too highly classified, but it has not been determined to be classified. I mean, I'm sitting there looking at this and going, what? I'm not good at deciphering gobbledygook. And so it looks to me, and then we saw the email that she sent out the other week, that came to light, where she said, well, take the classified document, clip off that was classified, cut and paste it, put it on an unclassified thing and send it to me. And I'm thinking, wow. I mean, I don't know if you have to deal with any of these kind of classification kind of things, but if you did, I mean, wouldn't you be in trouble for doing things this way? Just my thought. Go ahead.
Gary, I have held a top security clearance for a couple decades now, and I guarantee you everybody that's watching this unfold right now that has ever had a clearance knows exactly what's going on here. And any other one of us, there are two standards of justice. It's very clear in the United States. I'm not saying that she shouldn't have her due process, because she absolutely should, but I guarantee you anybody that had a classification, that would have been immediately revoked, and you would be under a horrific cloud. And certainly by now, with the evidence that I've heard, you would be indicted. And I listened to her verbiage, and you got to remember, she speaks very clearly, but she says, I did not send any emails marked classified. Nothing is marked classified, Gary. Everything classified means there is a classification for official use only. Top secret, secret, above top secret, compartmentalized. Those are classifications. Nothing is marked classified. Classified describes documents that are sensitive that need further adjudication, so to speak, or have a moniker put on them so you understand the level of import and sensitivity. So when she says that, she's not lying, but in effect, if you don't know the system, you think that she's not lying when really she's not telling the truth. Nothing is marked classified.
Well, you've got this classification. So what is the assumption that you are under when you are dealing with information that's coming to you that could or could not be classified? Do you err on the side of it's probably classified, or do you err on the side it's probably not classified?
Here's the assumption, Gary. These classified systems never touch unclassified systems. If it's on the classified system, it is never, ever, ever allowed to leave, ever.
Wow.
It cannot. They do not touch each other. So the fact that happened at all is a crime.
So in essence,
I've seen them lock down whole bases. Yeah. I've seen them lock down whole bases for this migrating of information from one system for another, and I'm just talking about training exercise.
So what she in essence did, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you correct me if I'm wrong, is she mixed the unclassified with the classified and just played with it fast and loose.
Yeah, that's absolutely. She mixed the two together, and we know darn well knowingly. And everybody around her did it knowingly. Gary, I know the email addresses. I can't tell you I look at every single person's email address, but I can tell you when I have a limited amount of emails because literally thousands of them come in, but the people I deal with, we're dealing with unofficial systems. And if they had something other than an official email address, it would immediately alert me to a problem.
Unbelievable. Congressman, appreciate you being with us this morning. Thank you for the insights on that, because a lot of people have not heard that before. And I look forward to talking to you next month. Be safe in your travels. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.